Do chicken sandwiches disprove capitalism? Is a bar owner greedy for not wanting to sell his property for less than $15 million? And how does the First Amendment deal with misinformation? We answer these questions and more on this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. This is the show where we go through our social media feeds and we find all kinds of interesting takes, whether we like them or not, and then we put them in the spotlight and try to highlight what's wrong or what's right with them. My name is Donald, and I'm here with my co-host Britt. And before we get started, just a reminder to like and share and subscribe, leave a comment, send us suggested takes to analyze, all that good stuff. It really helps us out. You can follow us on Instagram at Good Take, Bad Take Pod, and on Twitter and YouTube at Good Bad Take Pod. Again, all the interaction we get is super helpful, and we appreciate it, and we love hearing from you guys. So, without further ado, let's move on to our first take. This was a Facebook comment talking about some other aspects. I don't remember particularly what this was, but it was just the government lying again. You know, one of the many times you'll see that general take. And this comment reads, "Yeah, just like, quote, 15 days to stop the spread, end quote. The, quote, vaccine will prevent infection and reinfection, end quote. Masks stop transmission. It wasn't a lab leak. We've learned that beginning in spring 2020, that government is unreliable and self-perpetuating." So what do you think about this particular take, Britt?
I mean, it's good. A little too late, I guess I could say at the end. So it's not a bad take. It's right. You're just kind of late to the party in that thinking that like, oh, 2020 is when we realized, in the spring of 2020, that government is unreliable and self-perpetuating.
That's when we learned it.
Yeah, that's when we finally learned it.
Yeah.
Not the wars in Iraq or the when we went off the gold standard or World War I or any of those. It took till 2020.
Central banks, nothing like
Vietnam,
that.
Yep, no. All that stuff. And that's kind of the underlying point, right? Like a lot of, you and I both love listening to Dave Smith, and he's kind of been on that Scott Adams guy, the creator of Dilbert, about like, because Scott Adams genuinely asked, like on Twitter, how did you get it right? Right? Like I know you got it right, but can you tell me how you got it right? I don't, if it's guesswork, right? It's like he's basically asking people, show the math of how you knew that the government was lying about this stuff. It's like, well, we just start from the assumption that the government is unreliable, self-perpetuating, and I would add on to that, generally evil and self-serving. And if you start from that premise, suddenly you can kind of, it's a really great lens to look at everything through, and you're generally going to like land on the truth in some way from that. And yeah, so what's been great about, the COVID pandemic is I think a lot of conservatives that were very, from the last big crisis, the war on terror that they had, a lot of conservatives have kind of woken up from that. What kind of sucks is that a lot of the liberals have gone to the exact opposite side. So I don't know if it's really a net gain for us in any way for lovers of liberty.
Yeah, and with what that assumption you were talking about, that I think is right on the money. You start from the assumption that the government is lying to you or has incentive to deceive or whatever, and like that's the key thing. You don't even have to, if you want to be more generous, let's say, to the government. You don't even have to start from the assumption that the government is lying to you. All you have to do is recognize that the government has the incentive to lie to you, right? They have a perverse incentive, and then things will start to make sense from there on out, right? Because you don't even need, evidence that the government is lying to just to ask the question, what do they have to gain if this was a lie, right? And that's kind of the default position you should be taking in general with critical thinking, is not just
with anyone.
Yeah, exactly. With anyone or anything. It's if everyone kind of talks about how, if a product is free, then you are the payment of the kind, you are
the product.
Yeah, you are the product, essentially, right? And so it's like, in that same way where you shouldn't just sort of take, oh, it's a free handout. You should be, maybe not totally like untrusting of anyone ever, but you should always at least ask questions and try to figure that kind of thing out and be like, well, is there, what's the possible incentive here for this to be true, and what's the possible incentive for this to be deceptive? And so Yeah, this is a good take, but I wanted to highlight that it's not, it's, you could almost call it a bad take because of the start of the, we learned at the beginning of spring 2020.
Yeah.
This is also coming from someone who would fancy themselves a conservative, which makes it even funnier to me. Is, your whole position has been that you're for small government and that big government sucks and all that. And it's like, well, okay, are you saying that everything prior to 2020,
Was small.
yeah, was small, or that somehow prior to 2020 you didn't actually believe all those things? Because it was fine then, but only after 2020 did we realize we had reason to distrust the government. It's like, well, then why were you anti-government before that? So it's not even like a totally coherent viewpoint to say that if you are a conservative, which I'm pretty sure this person has been a lifelong conservative. So it's not like COVID just flipped this person. I think they're now just saying, now you can see the nefariousness of it, and it's like, okay, but like prior to this, there were also lots of signs. You called yourself small government, so like, where was the holdup then? But like you said, it's better that people are moving this direction for sure.
Yeah, I like what you're saying about how it's not even just like looking at the government through that lens. It's just in general critical thinking. And I, like right now, I mean, I've talked to you about it, but like I'm doing the marathon through Mises's Human Action, and the part that took me the longest is the first few chapters where he basically lays out what human action is, right? And
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, he views it as human action as its own science, right? Like its own field of study. And it's the study of like, okay, when certain incentives are, exist, like how do humans act upon those incentives,
Hmm.
regardless of whether they are part of a government or part of, whatever, the public or private. And it's like, oh, you can actually create a pretty accurate and forward looking theory, or I guess a theory that looks forward and is pretty accurate in its predictions, looking at through specific lenses and whatnot. So it's not only can we were we right about the COVID pandemic because we don't trust the government, right? Like we know there are certain perverse incentives for government. We also know that the government exists and that there are corporations that exist with levers within the government to pull. And so therefore, if you're a vaccine maker and you can make, a product and you're making a product that has no liability that everyone is going to be forced to take, it's like, I probably don't want to take that, right? Because there's an incentive for it to either one, it's not super well tested, or two, right? Like it doesn't work, right? And so it's like we have to make it mandatory in order for people to take it, because if it worked and the benefit was there, then people would just take it anyways, right? So anytime something becomes mandatory, we are enacting our theory of human action. We're looking at it through the lens of human action and looking at it through incentives and drawing conclusions about whether something is actually, has any high efficacy or not. And so that type of thinking applies not just to the government, but also to any sort of interest that is out there.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the reason why I think, you and I would so heavily emphasize this in particular when it comes to government is that the government is a unique entity amongst all
Yeah.
others. So, as you say rightly, we should question this about everyone, but the reason why in particular we're going to start with this assumption from the government is that of all entities, and there are a lot in life and this world that we live in, that have perverse incentives and have great means of power, and little accountability. The government is the sole institution which has a use of force that is deemed legitimate by a lot of people who will not question it, right? So you might say that,
Even if they
well,
think it's wrong, even
yeah,
if they think the
exactly.
use of force is wrong, it's still
And
legitimate.
yeah, totally, exactly. And so the thing is, like, some people might say, well, corporations have a lot of power. Corporations can use force, but the difference is that a corporation will be called out way more when there are displays of force, even if they were to use them, than way more often than a government. I think that even when you hire like a private security firm and they do stuff, people get really antsy and stuff like that. The government will literally do things that are inhumane, and people will defend it because it is this institution they look at. They won't look at the specifics, or if they do, they'll dismiss them because of the institution that it is. So, in terms of actual material power, technically maybe a big corporation and the government might be on equal footing there, or in the world of like the data information sector, maybe technically one of these tech companies has more access at the time. The difference, of course, being that the government has the unique role where the citizenry as a whole will forgive it for any use of force to collect the data that the other corporations have or to use force on the citizens. So that's why, in particular, they have the most perverse incentives to harm people, to lie, to deceive, to do that, because they are the sole purveyors of force. They are the sole people who have a monopoly on your money and your work and your ethic too. So that is one reason why, for instance, even though we say do it to all, it's like always the government in particular.
Yeah, always.
And why I think Dave Smith is right to make that assumption when talking to Scott Adams, who I think I don't know, I think he was trying to make that snarky point, like how did you know, and trying to corner people into saying, well,
You got lucky.
someone I like said that, which is no different than saying trust the experts.
Yeah.
I think that was kind of his game. But this viewpoint, I think, is the correct one to say. If you just start with the assumption that the government is trying to deceive you, then everything else is going to add up a little bit more. Okay, moving to our next post. This one is a picture meme format that says, in quotes, capitalism breeds innovation, and then capitalism. And then it shows 12 different chicken sandwiches from fast food restaurants, from Popeyes to Sonic to Chick-fil-A, McDonald's. And they're all, a chicken sandwich. And the tweet with the picture is attached to reads, "Nope, capitalism breeds blanks like Elon Musk," censored for inappropriate language there. But it was not a nice word. Yeah, it was not a nice word there. So what do you think? Is the 12 different chicken sandwich picture a convincing debunking of capitalism for you there, Britt?
Oh, no. I mean, of all of these, I can't eat fried chicken with like that's breaded anymore, unfortunately. But man, I've throughout my life, up until about 5 years ago, I'd eat a lot of it, and there was kind of a different type of place that I would frequent based on what stage of life I was in. Most of it determined by like my income.
Yeah.
So when I was a college student, right, it was the Wendy's chicken sandwich down there. I could get that. I think they had like a 4 for $4 thing with the chicken sandwich.
Yep.
I could get it. And then if I added an extra $1, I could get a pretzel bun with it. So it was amazing, right? For like $6 or $7. This is 6-7 years ago, before all the inflation hit and everything, but or as bad as it is now. But I could get it, and it was amazing as a college student, right? I could get a really awesome chicken sandwich. And then I would reserve like my premium dollars or Christmas gifts, request a gift card to Chick-fil-A, because Chick-fil-A sandwiches are obviously a little bit more. You can only get one sandwich for maybe $6 or $7 at Chick-fil-A. And so I didn't really go to any of these other spots. I mean, I would love to try them, I guess. I know my wife really loves the Burger King chicken sandwich. And, I had my fair share of McChickens in Kingston growing up and everything. But, of basically, I think that's like 5, right? 5 of these places, I've used at some point or another, and I chose them because of the needs that I had at the time, and they were best able to serve that need. Wendy's because it was cheaper, Chick-fil-A because I liked it more. And so it's like, yeah, there is innovation there, right? Like there are trade-offs when you're developing a product. I know it sounds silly talking about like a chicken sandwich, but Wendy's figured out like, hey, we can cut back on certain supply chain things. We can have less good ingredients. Maybe we can prepare it in an easier way, and we can provide it at, a lower cost and maybe even a little bit lower margin, but we'll get people like College Brit to be able to buy us. And Chick-fil-A said, nah, we don't want to do that. We want to just create really awesome chicken sandwiches and be closed on Sunday. So we're going to have to make our prices a little bit higher. So capitalism does breed innovation, even with chicken sandwiches, and that they can serve everyone, and that these can all exist, and everyone is fat and happy, and it's awesome. On the topic of Elon Musk, it's like this Ian Parsa guy. It's like, yeah, you could think whatever you want of who Elon Musk is. It's like, but that does no bearing on whether like capitalism is good or not, right? Like Elon Musk, whether you like him or not, has created thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs. If you consider not only the jobs at Tesla that he has, but all of the supply chain demand that he's created, all of the ancillary infrastructure that he's created, the charging stations or maintaining them and things like that. So Elon Musk has done infinitely a lot of good for the world, even if he is a jerk. So yeah, it also is innovation in that he had to figure out new ways. You know, right? If you're going to bring an electric vehicle to market, there's a lot of new things you have to do to make that possible. And somehow they figured it out. So it's a
Yeah,
bad take.
yeah. This
All that to
is a
say.
terrible take. I will first I want to this is pretty irrelevant but important, just on a to straighten out to the listeners here. The Burger King chicken sandwich that they normally serve, there's a normal chicken thing they've had forever, is terrible. But they had a chicken sandwich that was glorious, and it was limited time for some reason. Then they stopped, and it was so good. I promise, it was
No,
amazing.
I think that's the one my wife liked. I
Yeah.
remember because they're like, "Oh, we got to go try it." I was like, "I can't
Yes.
eat it, but you can." Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to vindicate your wife, because some people might be thinking of this horrible sandwich that, as far as innovation goes, actually the innovation is that it's dirt cheap. It's dirt cheap. However, it is not very good. But yeah, no, but they're limited time one. They don't do it anymore. It was actually a
bummer.
top contender. So I will say that. Yeah, but that is the kind of the funny thing about that, as you demonstrated with the the quality and the points, even within, I mean, even within these individual franchises, it's just so dumb to think that you can isolate one particular aspect of these franchises and then say, look, there's no innovation, because what the other thing they will do is they'll then say, let's say that they didn't all have this. Oh, where's your competition? How come prices aren't being driven lower by competition if capitalism's so great? So you demonstrate competition, and you demonstrate the competing values of, this one's higher quality but this one will drop prices, and there's no monopoly here. Look, all these different options, and they're like, oh, it's so innovative. They're always shifting the goalpost. So don't forget that this is not the conversation that you need to have here, because that's not what the argument should be in this particular moment. The argument shouldn't be oh, that capitalism sucks because there's 12 chicken sandwiches and that's not innovative. The answer to this is no. Capitalism is great because there's 12 different chicken sandwiches at different places that are providing different values to people and driving down the costs. There's not a monopoly on chicken sandwiches. That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
great. And so that's what makes this take so particularly frustrating. The other aspect I want to say too is these restaurants do innovate in their own ways with
Yeah.
these. So you talk about like the inflation, I think, has ruined to some degree that 4 for 4 from Wendy's. But you talk about innovation in these different restaurants. Well, the way that like Chick-fil-A now competes, instead of being able to offer a chicken sandwich at a lower price point, what they do is they compel you to use their app to earn loyalty points, and that draws you back. And then they'll be like, leave us a review, give us feedback, let us know how we're doing, give us that, which is also a form of currency, right? Information is a valuable resource. And then, hey, guess what? We'll give you a free chicken sandwich on the app you can redeem. And so it's like they don't offer that 4 for 4, but they give you a different innovative way to engage with them that's beneficial for you, because you get a free chicken sandwich that's high quality. It's beneficial for them because they get your repeat business, as well as the information of how they can do better and earn it later down the road. So even if you ignore all the other aspects of these businesses, ignore all the other, food they serve and stuff like that, they are innovating even within just the chicken sandwich game, which is a funny thing to note, I think.
I don't have any more, and I'm just kind of hungry now. So
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm sorry to make you hungry on something you can't even really enjoy.
yeah. My wife actually today, she made like a gluten-free chicken nugget thing. It was awesome. So that's what I was
Ooh.
thinking of. It was very good. You might
I'm
not
glad.
like it. All you people that can eat normal things, but I liked it. So
Well, it's like a grading on a curve. If you can't have the thing, you're why deprive yourself? Have something that's close.
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
hold it against you. Okay. Speaking of Dave Smith, here's 2 tweets from him. First is, what's happening to Andrew Tate is appalling. However you feel about him personally, he's a US citizen being held without charges for months in a Romanian prison. If you do not believe in the presumption of innocence, then you are an enemy of liberty and civilization. And then he replies to that with a second tweet. I'm a family man. I hate promoting pimp culture. Pimp stuff, I guess. But I can also recognize that people have been promoting that stuff to young men for my entire life. See hip hop. He was targeted, first deplatformed, and then arrested. because he opposes the regime and is enormously popular. What do you think about this take, Britt?
I think it's really good, really balanced. Andrew Tate says a lot of good things and a very, very many bad things, and he lives an even worse life in a lot of ways. And I think my opinion on him, it's like, man, when you kind of slap down good masculinity, when you say that any form of masculinity is toxic, instead of affirming like, hey, there's good, strong values, there's good, strong traditional things that men should do, and then there's bad, lame things that men shouldn't do, and instead just kind of lump them all together and say it's all bad, you get a vacuum that people like Andrew Tate step into because men do desire to be strong. They do desire to be courageous. And if you don't have role models that are willing to, display that to people, then you get people that are just brutal. And that's Andrew Tate. He's a bad person. Might even deserve to be in jail. But what I think is so crazy, and this is what Dave Smith is talking about here, is that the Romanians threw him in prison. They can lock him up for 30 days without charging him with anything. Then they can request an extension for another 30 days and so on and so forth. So I think they're on day 90 now of him being in a Romanian prison. They can go up to 180 days of holding him without charging him for anything. So there's basically no presumption of innocence, right? You can't, in the United States, at least, it used to be, maybe never used to be, but in general, the understanding is that you are innocent until proven guilty, and we can't enact, punishments upon you until, you're actually being charged for something.
Right.
So, his point about, if you don't believe in the presumption of innocence, then you're an enemy of liberty and civilization is awesome, because if you believe that, we have these inalienable rights, that we should be free to be able to do what we need to do, as long as we're not hurting other people, but all of those rights can be stripped away the second someone levies an accusation against you, then you actually don't have any of those rights, right? So it's a bedrock principle, as foundational as the non-aggression principle. And I like how he kind of talks about him being a family man and stuff. I think that's good culture stuff. So yeah, great take in my opinion from Dave Smith.
Yeah, I mostly agree. The only question I'll start with my potential pause is I don't know. I frankly have not listened to Andrew Tate very much, because I don't find he brings things that I am not getting in better forms elsewhere, and he's bringing a lot of stupid things.
Yeah,
Um, so I don't know how much speaking against the regime he does.
he did
And
a fair bit.
okay, I do hesitate to totally say he was targeted and arrested because he opposed the regime and I don't know how true that is. I think, this is one of those takes that it very well could be true, but also it could very well be true that the things he is being accused of
Oh yeah,
are accurate, and this will look way worse in retrospect to say that kind of thing. So
they should
again, I'm not
charge him
saying,
though, right?
yeah,
If they
yeah,
actually, if they had enough to arrest him, they should charge him. And I
I
definitely think
definitely
that's
agree.
like, if someone told me, hey, he's a human trafficker, I'd be like, yeah, you're probably not wrong. I mean, I'm
Right.
not surprised by it, but they haven't
So
charged him, which is the crazy part.
I completely, yeah, I completely agree with that. But that would be my leading point,
Yeah.
not that he was targeted on all this because
Mm,
he was, because I just don't know. I don't. It's kind of one of those things that's kind of hard to make that claim without evidence
sure.
first. So it's one of those things where I completely agree with Dave. He, even if he's doing these horrible things, you have to presume innocence. You have to have the evidence to do all that first and foremost.
Yeah.
And if you don't believe in that presumption of innocence, that's a horribly dangerous precedent to set. So I completely agree all there. The only thing I don't love is like making this broad declaration that the reason why he's being targeted is because of this opposition to the regime. Because like,
Might
frankly,
not be
I
true.
don't think that's his that's not what most people know him for, even his fans. I think his fans know
Mm.
him first and foremost as someone who's defying culture, not necessarily the regime in those ways. And I think there is a distinction there. I think oftentimes the regime does use the culture and is part of the culture, but I also
Mm.
think that there is a difference between what the regime ultimately wants and the culture war. I think the culture war is more of a means to an end for the regime, or broadly speaking, as this term of the regime, as if there's this council, but um, so yeah, but otherwise, I completely agree. He shouldn't be held against his will without evidence in this way. It's frankly kind of terrifying because there's almost certainly a level of um, U.S. involvement in that,
Yeah.
and that is a terrifying, I don't know, assumption to live under, the idea that the U.S. can track you out of country and then have a government that does not have the few good protections that the US is supposed to have, um and abuse those just based on the very fact that they don't have them codified in law. That's a pretty scary, thing to think.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to the next post here. This one comes from Jerry Patterson, and this tweet reads: In 2022, the bar owner protested his tax valuation in Bexar County. He claimed his property was worth $527,000. Now he wants 15 million from Texas taxpayers to buy him out. Tell me again who's acting in bad faith? Can you give us a little bit of
Yeah.
context on this situation here, Britt?
Yeah, so there's a bar owner. I can't remember the name of the bar off the top of my head. He's located in the downtown area, kind of near close to the Alamo. Um, and Anyways, he moved in there, I think about 17 years ago, a long time ago. I can't remember the exact date. Remodeled the place. It was run down. No one wanted to be in that part of town because it was a little bit rough. So he took the risk, bought it, did everything, made it an awesome bar, made it kind of a local staple. And in the past few years, it started to thrive. The city now wants to do some renovations on the Alamo. They want to do some other stuff. And so they're buying up or trying to buy up all of the land around it, which also includes his property. And so they came to him and they said, hey, we're declaring eminent domain. We're going to offer you, I think it was like $4 million for your property. And you're going to take it and you're going to be happy with it. And he said, no, I don't want that deal. I want $15 million. And so this is kind of brought eminent domain back into at least our liberty circles, the discussion. And so people like this Jerry Patterson guy are saying, well, he's just so greedy. He's acting in bad faith. He just wants to rob taxpayers of their money. And the thing about eminent domain is it's like, if someone can come in and unilaterally take your property from you for whatever price they declare, is it really your property? Like, no, it's not. So we either need to stop calling it private property and acting like we can own things, or we need to declare the government for what it is, which is a bad actor that are thieves and liars and scum. And so, this poor guy, whether or not you like him personally or not, he's responding to incentives. So when the government comes and says, hey, we're going to tax you on the property that you've already bought, and we're going to tax you based on the valuation that property is. I don't know what it is, but I know here in the county I live in Washington, it's like 1.1% or something like that of the declared value is what you pay yearly. And so you are incentivized because they're going to fine you for owning something to make your property look like it's worth less than it actually is. So that's what he did there. And now that someone wants to buy it from him, the value of something is that which someone is one, willing to pay for it, and two, what the person is willing to part with it for. So this guy moved in there, took a lot of risk, hours of his family's lives, thousands of them, a lot of opportunity cost, a lot of factors that are not just wrapped up in the value of the property itself, but in the opportunities in life that he lost in the time and investment and things like that. And he values all of that wrapped up as $15 million, right? That's what it takes to get him to give up on the path that he has taken and the dream that he has built. And the city's saying, no, we want to take it from you for $4 million. The amounts really don't matter at the end of the day. What really matters is that someone bought something, they should be able to part with it for what they want.
Absolutely. And just to break down the specifics of this Patterson guy, his username is Patterson4Texas, so it sounds like he might be a politician or something like that.
He's a city council person, I believe, in San Antonio.
Got it. Yeah, typical. He's playing a game here with the numbers. So the point he's trying to demonstrate is, look, he's only claiming the property was worth $527,000, and now he wants to sell it from $15 million. He's acting in bad faith. But that's comparing apples to oranges there, right?
Yep.
Because even if he was selling to a private individual because he decided that he wanted to sell it, not because the government was forcing him to, he wouldn't ask for $527,000. He would ask for more because you're not just selling what the property is worth. You're selling the business. You're selling the potential. You're selling all of the things that go into it that aren't just the tax value of that. So, yeah, 15 million is way higher than 527,000, but that 15 million is assuming, in the future what kind of a place it will be, what kind of a place he could have had. What, it's worth him to lose this for 15 million because in his estimation, if he wasn't to sell it, he would be getting $15 million worth in the future, not tomorrow. He's not saying this business is currently worth that, but he's saying that I am selling this to you because you are depriving me of my future. And that's kind of the key difference in negotiating a sale under voluntary terms and under compulsory terms. Because if this was a voluntary exchange, he wouldn't ask for 15 million because he would be, or maybe he would, but he would come to the table ready to sell. He wouldn't need to be in this position where he has to think, I have to, ask for the future potential earning of this. You would probably sell it closer to what it's worth because that's what someone's going to pay for it. And also because you've calculated that you're willing to do that. This is coming to him completely unprovoked. This is coming to him without him being the first person to say, hey, I'm ready to sell this. So of course he's going to have to hedge his bets. Of course he has to, build up savings as well for things that he didn't account for having to sell this. So a 15 million ask, it makes complete sense when you think about it's not just what the current tax valuation of the property is. That's such a limited bureaucratic way of thinking about property and ownership rights, even without bringing into sort of the actual like fundamental rights aspect, which you touched on.
Yeah, and I got a quote from him right here. He's like, hey, if they need the property for the museum, I've told them that I'm willing to sell it for, $17 million or $15 million, or whatever it was. But he's like, otherwise, I'd like to be part of the new Alamo economy that's going to be incredible after they open up the museum. And the budget that the city of San Antonio has set aside for this is $150 million. And it's like, I just like, you think about the incentives, right? And we've talked about this on other shows. It's like these politicians like Jerry Patterson and the San Antonio City Council and stuff, they get a hold of whatever federal funding or whatever dollars they can get, and then they pass it to people that have either donated to them, construction companies, different types of incentives. And so the reason they don't want to pay what the fair market value is, and the fair market value is what Vince, the owner, is willing to part with it for, is because there's going to be less kickback that they're going to be able to give to the people that they want to give it to. And it also is kind of a slap in their face that these people that have never really generated a lot of value as city council people, they only take value. Now they're going to, not have as much dollars to go do stuff, and they're not going to be able to take what they want to take, and their project's going to be a little bit less. It's not going to be a big stamp. So it's eminent domain as well as asset forfeiture, civil asset forfeiture. Yeah, are evil things. They're awful, evil things, and they should demonstrate the reality of the totalitarian government we live under that can take anything they want from you at any time based on the whims of who's in power. So you're not truly free if that's actually what's possible.
Yeah. As you that quote that you started with highlighted just the last thing here, just another reason why the 15 million makes sense. If the museum hasn't opened up yet, so his whole point is that this is what it will be worth when this opens up. So of course he's not going to say his property is worth an amount that it will be worth in the future. It's just such a stupid comparison point. It makes me mad. And the problem is that these kinds of things are so well deceiving to people. They're so cleverly hidden in there, right? It's like, look, these are two numbers that are compared, but you don't see behind the scenes how they're so different and they're so opposite, and they make no sense to compare. And people just see it and think, yeah, wow, he must be greedy, which is just a terrible take. Okay, and our last take comes from Justin Amash. Justin tweets, "The First Amendment protects the spreading of misinformation in almost every context. It does so because what's widely perceived as false may at times be unpopular truth. It recognizes that human progress is built upon the advancement of ideas the majority once did not accept." What do you think about this take, Britt?
It was fantastic. I really appreciated how clear and concise he laid this concept out, because it's kind of difficult, right, to lay out why free speech is so important and set it within the context of like I guess, like why it betters humanity, other than because you can make the argument pretty clearly of like, oh well, it's a human right. But then there's a lot of people that are objectivist, more objectivist leaning, that want to know, well, why is it a human right? How does it actually benefit humans for it to be a human right? And his last sentence, that human progress is built upon the advancement of ideas the majority once did not accept, is so true. And it's like fundamental almost, right? Like we hear all these cliches all the time about, oh yeah, you got to break the mold or think outside the box or whatever. And we've all kind of come to think of ourselves as people that do think outside the box, or that we do break the mold. But if we all are thinking that, it's like that villain in The Incredibles, if everyone's special, then no one is, right? So yeah, it's like, it's really important for people that have dissenting opinions, dissenting ideas, or believe that something should be different, be able to voice that, because at some point, right, like the ideas shift, right? They're either proven wrong or they're proven right. And if they're proven right, then the world becomes a better place. There are a lot of ideas that were once untenable, like that blacks were not people, or blacks should be people and should have human rights and should be able to do all this stuff that we now enjoy, that were not commonly held, right? Like it was a really weird thing, and a really shamed thing to hold that type of thought, and a minority thought that, but eventually those ideas won out. And so all of our progress is built upon that. And other than the moral aspect of it, which you and I would argue is like, hey, it's everyone should be able to say what they want to say. There's a really awesome pragmatic argument to be made there as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think his take here is fantastic. It's kind of like the more explained, reasoned idea of the marketplace of ideas that I think people throw around and kind of mock. Like, oh man, misinformation exists, therefore the marketplace of ideas is a concept that doesn't make any sense. But I think he's completely right in that, there's no society in which uh, truth will always come out first and foremost, and people act as though, if you just crack down on the right kinds of speech, all of a sudden you're somehow going to have this society that doesn't have anything wrong. You just have to crack down on the people who are spreading misinformation, and it's verified. And if COVID taught the vast majority of people anything, it should be that there isn't a consensus on, there isn't a monopoly on truth, and that the experts are wrong at times. And so not only is it just even impractical to try to think that you can control truth in such a way, but it's dangerous to do that. And that's the exact hedge that free speech creates. And so I think he's completely right. And um I also appreciate his last line, how he talks about the advancement of ideas, and that is relied upon for human progress. Because I think people also tend to think in the here and now, and like, well, we just need to crack down on these misinformation people in the short term and just get rid of them. But it's like, you also have to think broadly speaking. If some wrong ideas are being spread now in the short term because of free speech, isn't it better that happens now in the short term than broadly, over the long course of time, the wrong thing is hammered in and instilled by law, by letter of law, and by crackdown and things like that. And I think that you see examples of that happening in countries like communist China, and even Hitler in Nazi Germany, where there are these sort of codified things you have to believe in truth, and it ultimately sets people back, and they kind of end up hurting their own human progress in those ways too.
Yeah, I mean, I watched this documentary on North Korea because I always assume it's like, oh, there, however many people live there. I think it's like 11 million people or whatever. How do they not rise up against this oppressive regime? And then you watch this documentary and you realize, like, oh crap, like the concept of truth, that there's an objective reality that we relate to, doesn't exist there. And it hasn't existed there for generations, right? So it's not only the children that have been indoctrinated, it's their parents and their grandparents and the grandparents before them that have all been indoctrinated that, oh, the only truth that matters, what truth is what, the dear leader, decides. And you look at that and you realize, like, these people aren't even able to really think properly, right? Because there is no concept. It's like, well, it's whatever this person tells me is what I need to believe. And the consequences of not being able to think is starvation, right? It's human
Right.
suffering. It's awfulness because no one can actually problem solve. And so you got people over there starving, no electricity, everything is bad. There's no progress because if you're not progressing, you're actually, receding. And so that's the consequence of not being able to speak out. And free speech is how we discover what truth is, right? By being able to pit these things against each other. And I'm assuming that this kind of comes on the heels of Tucker Carlson releasing that January 6th video, which sheds a lot of truth, on what actually happened that day. And then there's a lot of different pundits saying like, oh, this is awful, and we shouldn't, this is why we shouldn't have, absolute free speech and things like that. It's like, man, like we're in a terrifying position if someone can release video evidence, which used to kind of be known as the golden standard of what you could prove. And people are saying we need to silence that because it doesn't fit our narrative. So I get a little bit sad about that, seeing that, but because it's like, man, we can't even convince people when we have video evidence of something. But I'm hoping that the general public recognizes it for what it is, that there's a broader agenda going on, and that they kind of repel it.
Yeah, I think the other way to think about this, if you are skeptical, in particular, I like, how you're hinting at video used to be this gold standard of evidence. I think some people say, well, now we're in an era where not only is misinformation easy to spread, it's easy to create through AI or manipulated footage or whatever. Well, that to me is all the more reason why freedom of speech is crucial. Because think about this. Let's assume that Donald Trump won somehow but January 6th still happened. Okay, let's just assume something like January 6th happens. But Donald Trump won, and it's still a big deal for all these people. And now you have a Republican control. Let's say it's the Republican swept, so it's a super majority in the House and the Senate, and it's Donald Trump in the office again. And you have all this AI technology and all that kind of stuff. Okay, let's just assume that for a fact. So now you're telling me that you want to rely on this government to enforce what is and isn't true. And then you're also telling me that it's easier than ever to create false narratives of what can be perceived as true. Now, of course, in their mind, they're thinking anyone randomly can just create this stuff. But if anyone randomly can create this stuff, how much more can the government create all this stuff first? And so you have a total Republican or evil people controlled government who have not only the ability but the incentive, again, as we talked about earlier, to create misinformation, fake it through technological advances, and then enforce that as the prevailing narrative through law. That is what people are seriously saying. That's the alternative to free speech. In a world where it's easier to create fake proof, you want, for some reason, the people who have power to be able to enforce that. And that to me makes no sense whatsoever. All right. Well, that's it for this episode. So thanks so much for tuning in, guys. And if you want to leave us a like, share, a comment, all that good stuff, or if you disagreed with any of our assessments here, please let us know, and we will catch you on the next one.